Week 14 of the fantasy football season. Here's a few defense DST units I would add this week. The first one, Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So the Bucs is a 1-week streaming option. Have a great matchup coming up versus New Orleans Saints. We're going back in week 8. They shut that offense down. 3 points allowed, 5 sacks, 2 interceptions, 2 fumble recoveries, and a return touchdown in that ball game. So right here, good matchup, like I said, versus Saints. Give up the 6th most fantasy points to DSTs on the season. And the last few weeks for Tampa Bay's DST, week 11 at Buffalo, 44 points allowed, 2 interceptions, and fumble recovery. Week 12 at the Rams, 28 points allowed, a sack. And week 13 versus Arizona, 17 points allowed, 2 sacks, and interception, fumble recovery. So this is a big game for Tampa Bay. They know they got to keep afloat, with obviously Carolina right behind them in the division lead. But like I said, this Saint team, going back early in the year, they gave up a lot of points with Tyler Shuck in there, even though Shuck's definitely improved over the last 6-7 weeks of the season here. But I like Tampa Bay as a streaming option, and they're out there in 72% of fantasy leagues. Next DST is the Kansas City Chiefs. So this Chief unit, it's a tough ball game at Dallas. Bad loss for them, obviously, for Kansas City. And they're out there in 58% of fantasy leagues, where a lot of people dropped them in the league, seeing that matchup on the schedule versus one of the better offenses in the league. And this week, I think it is a good matchup with Houston Texans coming into town here. I know Houston, they're on fire. They've won a lot of ball games in a row, obviously, and CJ Stroud's back in the lineup. I think this defense could go out there, make plays, and it's another game at Arrowhead as well for them. Week 11 at Denver, 22 points allowed, 2 sacks. Week 12 versus the Colts, 20 points allowed. Week 13, like I said, at Dallas, 31 points allowed in interception. In week 14 versus Houston, we'll see what they can do with them coming in. But like I said, Houston's offense I don't think is all that great. Obviously, they got a stud receiver in Nico Collins, solid tight end Dalton Schultz. The running game isn't great, and CJ Stroud, he's been banged up this season, and also he's taken another step back over the last couple seasons. So this week, I think Kansas City, after a tough loss in Dallas, where it's a back-and-forth ball game, I think they go out there in a must-win situation. This defense buckles down and has a good game, and they're available in 58% of fantasy leagues. Next DST is the New York Jets. So this Jet team is a 1-week streaming option, has a great matchup in week 14 versus the Dolphins. I give up the 10th most fantasy points to DSTs on the season. So I know going back early in the season, they gave up 27 points and nothing else is this Jet team. And I know they don't create turnovers. Only 2 turnovers created all season long for this Jet team. But I think this could be a tight game, AFC East ball game, where Miami's offense has been hit or miss this season. And this Jet defense, believe it or not, I thought has still played decent. Sauce Gardner, Quinnen Williams, and Michael Carter all traded away at the deadline. The last few games, week 11 in New England, 27 points allowed, a sack. Week 12 at the Ravens, they were close in that game, majority of it, 23 points allowed, a sack. In week 13 versus the Falcons, 24 points allowed, 2 sacks, a fumble recovery. So like I said, there's a 1-week streaming option versus a mediocre Dolphin offense. They're available right now, 92% of fantasy leagues. Next DST is the Washington Commanders. So this Commander defense, they went out there and they played a good ball game, obviously. Even though they lost in overtime, they took the best team record-wise in the NFL to the limit, was this Commander DST, and almost beat them if it wasn't for a Nick Bonito deflected pass going for 2 points. So the last few weeks for Washington's DST, week 11 in Miami, 16 points allowed, 3 sacks. And then week 13 in that one versus Denver, they did give up 27 points, but it was a close game throughout. They made them earn their touchdowns and their points. 27 points allowed, a sack and an into. And this week it's a slam dunk matchup at the Minnesota Vikings. I give up the most fantasy points to DSTs on the season. So if it's J.J. McCarthy back in the lineup, or Max Brosmer, who's a turnover machine and couldn't move the football at all in that ball game at Seattle, I think this Commander defense, they could go into Minnesota, obviously not have to deal with outdoor elements like they did in that ball game in week 13 versus the Broncos. And that could get pressure on either McCarthy, Brosmer, whoever the quarterback is. That offense, they just can't operate and make plays. I think the Commanders is a streaming option out there in 95% of fantasy leagues versus one of the worst offenses in the league. Could go out there and have a good ball game in the final DSTs, the Tennessee Titans. So obviously the Titans, one of the worst teams in the league, but their defense is a good matchup here in week 14 at the Browns. I give up the 9th most fantasy points to DSTs on the season. So the last few weeks for the Titans defense, week 11 versus Houston, 16 points allowed, 4 sacks. Week 12 versus Seattle, 30 points allowed, a sack, a kick return, touchdown. In week 13 versus Jaguars, 25 points allowed, 3 sacks. So like I said, Tennessee, they're not a good defense. One of the worst teams in the league, obviously, is Tennessee Titans. But this week is a streaming option with 4 teams on bye, I think they could go out there at Cleveland and be a serviceable defense, available in 97% of fantasy leagues. That's a few defense DST units I would add off the waiver wire for week 14 of the fantasy football season.